The rain in Sector 4 did not wash things clean. It merely rearranged the grime. It fell in heavy, acidic sheets against the reinforced glass of the 54th floor, blurring the neon geometry of the Capitol arcology into a headache of bleeding light. Mason Vale stood by the window, a silhouette against the city that never slept. He held a glass of synthetic water he did not want, staring at the reflection of the room behind him rather than the sprawl outside. The apartment was a masterpiece of negation. White walls, gray furniture, surfaces so devoid of personal clutter they looked like they were waiting for a tenant who had not yet arrived. There were no photographs. There were no mementos from travel. There was, specifically and intentionally, nothing that could trigger a memory. He turned away from the window and walked to the bathroom. The mirror above the sink was draped in a black microfiber cloth. Mason did not like looking at his own face. It was a traitor's face, unremarkable and flat, with eyes that looked too old for a man barely into his 40s. He reached under the cloth to grab his toothbrush by feel, brushing his teeth with the mechanical efficiency of a machine performing a maintenance cycle. In the living room, the wall screen hummed to life automatically, triggered by his biosignature entering the space. The newsfeed was blaring, the audio volume set to a polite murmur that Mason found impossible to ignore. A newscaster with perfect poreless skin and eyes that had been surgically widened for maximum trustworthiness was nodding at a graphic of the Outer Rim territories. Debate continues today in the Senate regarding the expansion of the Refugee Integration Act. Senator Albrecht Kerr insists that the influx of displaced populations from the Kethrin sector represents a unique economic opportunity. Provided security protocols remain absolute. The screen cut to Senator Kerr, a man whose smile looked like it cost more than Mason's entire apartment block. "We are not just offering shelter," Kerr said, leaning over a podium emblazoned with the helix and star sigil of the human commonwealth. "We are offering purpose. Through our labor placement programs, these unfortunate souls can repay the debt of their rescue while contributing to the stability of our great society. It is safe. It is vetted. It is humanitarian." Mason tapped the console to mute it. Humanitarian. He knew that word. In the lexicon of the Commonwealth, it usually meant profitable for the shareholders of Helix Dominion and painful for everyone else. His comm unit chimed, a priority notification from the building administration. Mason sighed, the sound loud in the dead air of the room. He tapped the accept key. "Mr. Vale." The administrator's voice was smooth, synthetic, and relentlessly cheerful. "We noticed you have opted out of the standard maintenance package for 3 consecutive months. While we respect tenant privacy, hygiene standards in Sector 4 are strictly enforced to prevent biohazard buildup." "My apartment is clean," Mason said. His voice was rough from disuse. "Of course," the administrator replied, ignoring him. "However, we have a special subsidized offer available this week. The state is incentivizing the employment of vetted personnel from the integration program. We can send a cleaner up within the hour. It is incredibly cheap, fully insured, and counts toward your civic compliance score. You do want to keep your compliance score in the green tier, do you not, Mr. Vale?" It was a threat wrapped in customer service. If his score dropped, his rent would triple. "Fine," Mason said. "Send them." "Excellent choice. A technician has been dispatched. Please ensure all sensitive biometrics are secured." The line went dead. Mason looked around the empty room. There was nothing to secure. He had already buried everything that mattered. 20 minutes later, the door chime rang. Mason opened it, expecting a drone or a tired human in a gray jumpsuit. He was not expecting the woman who stood in the corridor. She was tall, perhaps a head taller than him, with the distinct, elegant physiology of the Kethran people. Her bone structure was architectural, high cheekbones shifting into a jawline that looked as if it had been carved from marble. Her skin was a pale, dusting violet, cool and matte under the harsh hallway lights. But it was the way she stood that caught Mason off guard. She did not slouch like the beaten refugees he saw on the news feeds. She stood with a calm, predatory grace, her shoulders back, her hands resting lightly on a cleaning cart that looked more like a mobile laboratory than a bucket of suds. "Mr. Vale," she said. Her voice was low, carrying a melodic resonance that vibrated in the air for a second after she stopped speaking. "I am Saren Vala. I have been assigned to your unit." Mason stepped back, his hand instinctively twitching toward a hip holster that hadn't been there in 2 years. He forced his hand to his side. "Right, come in." Saren did not move immediately. She looked down. For the first time, Mason noticed the child hiding behind the cleaning cart. She was small, perhaps 5 or 6 standard years old, wearing a tunic that had been mended with meticulous care. She was clinging to the fabric of Saren's utility trousers, her face pressed against the alien woman's thigh. "I must apologize," Saren said, her tone polite but laced with steel. "The child care center at the processing plant is currently over capacity and under quarantine for a mild viral strain. I could not leave her. She will remain with me while I work. She is quiet. She will touch nothing." Mason hesitated. The building regulations were explicit about unauthorized guests. If the administrator found out, it would be an infraction. But more than that, he did not want a child in here. Children were messy. Children were loud. Children were alive in a way that Mason was trying very hard not to be. He looked at Saren, ready to refuse. Then he saw the tension in her knuckles, the way she placed a protective hand on the girl's head. She was terrified he would say no, which meant she would lose the credits for this job, which meant she might not eat tonight. Mason hated himself for the hesitation. He hated the part of him that calculated the risk before the humanity. "It is fine," Mason said, stepping aside. "Just keep her out of the kitchen and there are sharp edges." Saren exhaled, a tiny release of tension that she instantly covered. "Thank you. Come, Lumi." The girl, Lumi, stepped out from behind the cart. Mason felt a sudden, inexplicable chill at the base of his skull. The child was silent. She did not look at the room, she looked straight at him. Her eyes were enormous, dominating her small face. They were not solid like a human's, nor completely dark like her mother's. They were layered, deep within the iris. Faint rings of luminescence seemed to orbit a central pupil, shifting and turning like clockwork made of starlight. It looked as if light was trapped behind them, struggling to get out. She studied him with an unsettling stillness. It was not the curiosity of a child. It was the assessment of an equal. Mason cleared his throat, breaking the contact. "I will be in the study. Do what you need to do." "We will be efficient," Saren said. She pushed the cart inside, the wheels making a soft whirring sound on the synthetic floor. Mason watched them for a moment. The silence in the room had changed. It was no longer empty. It was heavy, charged with the presence of 2 beings who did not belong in this sterile box. "You have supervisors," Mason said, gesturing vaguely at Lumi. "Strict ones. It looks like tiny supervisors are the worst. They notice when you miss a spot." It was a stupid joke, a throwaway line to fill the dead air. Saren paused while unpacking a canister. She looked at him, and the corner of her mouth twitched. It was not a full smile, but it was an almost smile, a crack in the armor. "She is indeed a harsh critic," Saren said. I will have to perform up to her standards. The humor slipped into the room like fresh air rushing into a vacuum lock. It was startling. Mason felt a strange tightness in his chest loosen. Just a fraction. He nodded, turned, and retreated to the study, closing the door halfway. He sat at his desk, pretending to review financial reports, but his eyes kept drifting to the gap in the door. He watched Saren work. It was not cleaning in any sense Mason understood. She did not use rags or sprays. She wore gloves that emitted a soft, violet pulse. When she passed her hand over a dusty shelf, the dust did not wipe away. It lifted into the air, caught in a suspension field, and coalesced into a tiny humming bead that she deposited into a containment unit on her belt. She moved to the kitchen counter, where a coffee stain had been set into the material for months. She applied a small device that looked like a jeweler's loop, and the stain simply vanished, dissolved at a molecular level, and replaced by the shimmer of restored composite. It was mesmerizing. It was alien. But it was what she did with the clutter that annoyed him. Mason had a stack of old data slugs on the side table. Saren did not just stack them. She arranged them. She placed them in a spiral pattern, graduating by size. She took the 3 throw pillows he never used and set them in a precise triangle on the couch. It was a Kethran habit, he realized. Peace patterns. Attempts to bring geometric order to a chaotic universe. It felt intimate. It felt like she was rewriting the code of his living space, translating his depression into her language of order. Mason tried not to watch her hands. They were long, slender, and incredibly strong. He watched the way her muscles shifted beneath the fabric of her tunic as she reached for a high shelf. He watched the way she tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear, a gesture so universally weary that it made his throat ache. He gripped the edge of his desk. He was a man starving for touch, pretending he was made of stone. The awkwardness was a physical weight in the room. He wanted to speak to her, to ask her where she was from, how she ended up scrubbing floors in a Sector 4 high-rise. But to ask was to open a door, and Mason Vale had welded all his doors shut. A small sound made him turn his head. Lumi had wandered away from her mother. She was standing in the hallway, just outside his study. She was looking at the gray metal cabinet bolted to the wall in the corner of the living room. Mason froze. That cabinet had not been opened in 2 years. It contained the remnants of the life he had erased. A kinetic pistol, an encrypted drive containing names he was trying to forget, and a uniform jacket with the insignia torn off. It was bio-locked to his DNA. Lumi walked toward it. Her movements were drift-like, silent. "Lumi," Saren said softly from the kitchen, her back turned. "Come back here." Lumi did not listen. She reached out with a small, pale hand and placed her palm flat against the cold metal of the cabinet door. The lock should have remained dead. It should have flashed red for unauthorized access. Instead, the biometric reader flickered. A soft amber light pulsed, not a rejection, but a query. The mechanism hummed, the sound of tumblers engaging deep within the alloy. Mason was out of his chair before he realized he had moved. "Don't touch that!" The snap of his voice was like a whip crack. Lumi snatched her hand back, her eyes widening. The amber light on the cabinet faded back to dead gray. Saren was there in a second, moving with a speed that blurred the air. She placed herself between Mason and her daughter, her posture shifting instantly from servant to shield. Her eyes, previously polite, were now hard, glittering with a cold, defensive light. "I apologize," Saren said. Her voice was ice. "She is curious. She meant no harm." Mason stood there, his chest heaving, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He felt foolish. He was a grown man yelling at a 5-year-old girl. It's sensitive equipment, Mason stammered, the anger draining away to leave a residue of shame. Dangerous. It has a shock defense system. It was a lie. Saren studied him. She did not believe him. She saw the fear in his posture, the way he positioned his body to block the cabinet from view. She was used to humans who feared what they did not understand. Humans who guarded their secrets more fiercely than their children. "We are finished here," Saren said. She did not look at the cabinet. She looked at Mason with a dignity that made him feel small. The time allotted is over. She turned to the cart, packing her equipment with rapid, fluid motions. The mesmerizing grace was gone, replaced by a harsh efficiency. She wanted to leave. She wanted to get her daughter away from him. Mason watched her, the apology stuck in his throat. He wanted to say that he wasn't angry at the child, that he was angry at the cabinet, at the past, at the way the lock had hummed as if it knew her. But he said nothing. Saren put on her coat. It was a drab gray thing, issued by the refugee center, 3 sizes too big for her slender frame. She buttoned it to her chin. "Come, Lumi," she said. Lumi did not move. The child was standing by the door, but she wasn't looking at the exit. She was looking up at Mason. Her gaze was direct, unblinking. The star-like rings in her eyes seemed to spin faster, the luminescence flaring brighter. Mason met her eyes. He couldn't look away. And then, something detonated behind his eyes. It wasn't a headache. It was a physical impact, a psychic breach. The room tilted. The white walls of his apartment dissolved into static. The smell of lemon cleaning polish vanished, replaced instantly by the acrid copper stench of ozone and burnt blood. Dizziness. A metallic taste flooding his mouth. A phantom scream tearing through his eardrums. High-pitched, non-human, shattering glass. Flash. He was not in his apartment. He was in a corridor. Dark metal, slick with moisture. Smoke was billowing from a ventilation shaft. Thick and oily. Flash. Bodies. Kethran bodies, dressed in ceremonial robes, lying in heaps against the bulkheads. Flash. He was holding a weapon. The barrel was glowing hot. His hands were covered in blue blood. Flash. A child. A Kethran child with eyes like dying stars, screaming as she was dragged away by men in black armor. Flash. Mason gasped, a ragged, desperate sound, and slammed back into reality. He gripped the kitchen counter, his knuckles white, his legs trembling so violently he nearly collapsed. He was sweating, cold, clammy sweat that pricked at his scalp. He stared at Lumi. She was just a girl, just a child in a mended tunic. But for a second, he had seen a ghost. The thought struck him with the force of a revelation, a cinematic voiceover narration in his own mind that he couldn't silence. Human man hired alien widow as cleaner. But her daughter's eyes awoke something he had buried. The room was silent. The only sound was Mason's ragged breathing. Saren was staring at him. She had pulled Lumi back against her legs, her hand hovering near a pocket in her coat where a weapon might be hidden if she had one. "Mr. Vale?" Her voice was cautious, testing the air. Mason squeezed his eyes shut, forcing the smoke and the blood back into the dark box in his mind. He swallowed the bile rising in his throat. "Low blood sugar." Mason lied. His voice sounded like gravel. "I have a condition. I just need to sit down." He opened his eyes. Saren was watching him. Her expression was unreadable. She looked at his shaking hands, at the sweat on his forehead, at the terror that had not yet fully faded from his eyes. She did not believe him. Low blood sugar did not make a man look like he had just seen hell. but she did not expose him. She relaxed her stance slightly, her hand moving away from her pocket. She saw the pain. She recognized it because she saw it in the mirror every morning. "Drink water," Saren said simply, "and eat protein." She opened the door. "We will return next week unless you cancel the service." "I won't cancel," Mason whispered. He didn't know why he said it. He should cancel. He should run. Saren nodded once, a sharp, regal dip of her chin. Then she guided Lumi out into the corridor, and the door slid shut, locking Mason in with his silence. That night, Mason did not sleep. He passed out. The dreams came in fragments, sharp and jagged as broken glass. He was in a diplomatic chamber, a high-ceilinged room with a view of a nebula. He was younger. He was wearing his dress uniform. He was smiling. The sound of a lullaby, sung in a language that sounded like rain on a tin roof. The room exploding, a woman screaming, "Saren!" The name ripped through the dream. He didn't know who screamed it. Was it him? Was it someone else? A face. Saren's face. But she was happy. She was laughing. She was holding a man's hand. Gunfire. Mason woke up screaming into his pillow, his sheets tangled around his legs like a restraint system. He lay there in the dark, his heart hammering against his ribs, listening to the hum of the arcology, trying to remember why the name Saren felt like an accusation. 30 levels down, in the subterranean block designated for refugee housing, Saren Vala sat on the edge of a narrow bunk. The room was a closet compared to Mason's apartment. It smelled of recycled air and damp concrete. Lumi was asleep on the bottom bunk, curled into a tight ball, her breathing soft and rhythmic. Saren watched her daughter for a long moment, her expression fierce and tender. Then, she turned to her cleaning cart, which was parked in the corner. She knelt beside it and pressed a sequence of hidden pressure points along the handle. A secret panel hissed open near the base. Inside, there was no cleaning fluid. There was a thin, battered data slate, etched with the faint, scratched-out symbol of the Kithran Independence Faction, a group the Commonwealth had banned as terrorists. Saren activated the slate. The blue glow illuminated her face, casting deep shadows in the hollows of her cheeks. She brought up a file she had watched 1,000 times. It was a death report. Subject: Vala, Kyle. Status: deceased. Cause: industrial accident during processing. Timestamp: redacted audio. Corrupted Saren's finger traced the face of the man in the file photo. Her husband, Kyle. Accident, she whispered, the word a curse. She tapped the screen, bypassing the official report and opening a fragmented video file she had bought from a black market data broker 3 months ago. It was footage from the processing center on the day Kale died. The footage was grainy, the timestamp edited. It showed a hallway. It showed Kale being led away by 2 Helix Dominion security guards. But Saren didn't look at Kale. She paused the video at the 3-second mark and zoomed in on the background. There was a silhouette standing near the airlock, a human male. He was wearing a dark coat. He was turning away, but the posture was distinctive, the set of the shoulders, the way he held his head. Saren swiped her hand across the slate, bringing up a new image she had captured today with the micro camera in her cleaning goggles. It was Mason Vale, standing in his kitchen, gripping the counter. She overlaid the silhouette on the video with the image of Mason. The match was 94%. Saren felt a cold, hard satisfaction settle in her gut. It was not happiness. It was the feeling of a weapon locking into place. He was there. The man in the tower was there when Kale died. He knew. Saren looked back at Lumi, sleeping innocently in a world that wanted her dead. I will find it, Saren whispered into the dark. It was a vow. I will scrub their floors and clean their filth. I will let them think I am nothing. Her eyes narrowed, the violet irises darkening. I will use their kindness against them. And when I find out what they did to your father, I will burn their tower down. She deactivated the slate and slid it back into the hidden compartment. Outside, on the 54th floor balcony, a drone no larger than a coin clung to the railing of Mason Vale's apartment. Its single red optical sensor pulsed once, recording the man inside as he paced the floor, unable to sleep. Someone else was watching. Someone else already knew Saren was there. The morning sun hit the thermoplastic window of the apartment with a glare that felt personal. Mason Vale sat before his wall terminal, his fingers hovering over the interface. He was trying to do something simple. He was trying to fire his cleaner. "I am sorry, Mr. Vale," the automated housing assistant chimed, its voice a perfect synthesized blend of patience and condescension. "Cancellation within the introductory window requires a penalty fee of 400 credits and a written statement of dissatisfaction. Your current satisfaction index is logged as neutral." "I am dissatisfied," Mason said, his voice flat. "The service is unnecessary." "Nonsense. Your biometric scans indicate a 14% reduction in cortisol levels since the implementation of the hygiene protocol. The system has automatically renewed your appointment for this morning to ensure your continued well-being." Mason gritted his teeth. "Cancel it. I do not want them here." "Processing request," the voice hummed. "Oh, I see. The specific provider, Unit Vala, has been flagged as a high compatibility match for your household profile. Reassigning her to another sector would conflict with the refugee employment optimization algorithm. She is already in the elevator." Mason stared at the screen. It was not just bureaucracy. It felt like a loop, a snare tightening around his ankle. He told himself it was just the algorithm, just the mindless churn of a city run by code that prioritized efficiency over privacy. But his instincts, dormant for years under layers of cheap whiskey and suppressed memories, screamed that it was not. The door chime rang. Mason closed his eyes for a second, inhaling the sterile air of his apartment, wishing it would stay empty. Then he stood up and opened the door. Saren Vala stood there. She looked different today. The gray refugee coat was the same, but her posture was less guarded. She held the cleaning cart with one hand, her grip loose, confident. Lumi stood beside her, no longer hiding behind her mother's legs, but standing with her feet planted shoulder-width apart, staring up at Mason with those unblinking, star-ringed eyes. "Mr. Vale," Saren said. She didn't smile, but there was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there the week before. "I see you survived the week. The algorithm insists you need me." "The algorithm is pushy," Mason muttered, stepping back. "The algorithm is observant," Saren countered, stepping inside. She scanned the living room, her gaze landing on a pile of data slugs Mason had left scattered on the coffee table in a fit of insomnia-induced research. "And I see the nesting clutter has returned. You humans, you build towers to touch the stars. But inside your caves, you just want to build piles of rocks." Mason surprised himself by letting out a short, dry laugh. It felt rusty in his throat. "It is organized chaos." "It is a tripping hazard," Saren corrected, moving toward the mess. "Lumi, the perimeter is yours. Do not touch the angry cabinet." Lumi looked at the corner where the gun was locked away, then back at Mason. "It is not angry today," the child said. Her voice was soft, like wind chimes in a vacuum, but the clarity of her words hit Mason with physical force. "Excuse me?" Mason asked, looking down at her. Lumi didn't blink. The cabinet. It is quiet. You are the one who is loud. Mason frowned. I haven't said a word. You are loud inside, Lumi said, tapping her own chest. You are lonely, but you pretend it is discipline. The silence that followed was absolute. Mason felt the blood drain from his face. It was the kind of truth that usually required 3 drinks and a mirror to admit. And this child had just tossed it into the room like a discarded toy. Saren stiffened, her hand freezing over a cleaning nozzle. Lumi, that is not polite. It is true, Lumi said simply, then turned and walked away toward the window, her interest in the conversation evaporating as quickly as it had arrived. Mason watched her go, feeling exposed. He looked at Saren. Does she always do that? She sees things, Saren said quietly, not looking at him. She activated a mist sprayer, filling the air with a scent that was supposed to be lavender but smelled sharply of chemical sterilizer. She does not understand that humans prefer their truths wrapped in silence. The smell hit Mason's nose, and the room tilted. Chemicals, not lavender. Iodine and scorched ozone. He was walking down a long, white corridor. The lights were flickering. A gurney was being wheeled past him. A sheet pulled over a small shape. The smell of antiseptic was so strong he could taste it. Mason flinched, his hand jerking up to cover his mouth. He took a stumbling step back, his hip bumping into the wall. Saren turned instantly. She didn't ask what was wrong. She dropped the sprayer and stepped into his space, her eyes scanning his face with an intensity that felt like a medical scan. Who did you lose? She asked. It was a blunt, brutal question. No preamble, no softness. Mason stared at her. The chemical smell was still in his nose, warring with the scent of her, something earthy and spicy, like dry leaves and ozone. He wanted to tell her. The urge to vomit the truth out was sudden and overwhelming. I lost myself. I lost the man who thought he was a hero. It is nothing, Mason managed to say, his voice thick. Just a headache. The fumes. Saren held his gaze. She knew he was lying. He knew she knew. The tension between them shifted. It wasn't the awkwardness of strangers anymore. It was the heavy, charged silence of 2 people standing on opposite sides of a glass wall, pressing their hands against it. Breathing is useful, Saren said softly. Try it. She stepped back, picking up her sprayer. She let him deflect. She let him keep his walls. And because she let him, the walls felt a little thinner. An hour later, the dynamic had settled into a strange, domestic rhythm. Saren worked with her humming beads and shimmer lights, moving through the apartment like a dancer. Mason sat on his couch, pretending to read a report on the tablet. But he wasn't reading. He was watching the way her hair fell forward when she leaned over the table, a dark curtain obscuring her face until she tucked it back with a quick, impatient gesture. He watched the way her tunic stretched across her shoulders. He stood up to get a glass of water, and as he passed her, the space in the hallway felt too narrow. She turned to reach for a cloth at the same moment he stepped forward. They froze. They were inches apart. Mason could see the faint violet veins beneath the skin of her neck. He could see a tiny scar above her left eyebrow. Saren didn't move away. Her eyes flicked up to his, then down to his mouth, then back up. It was a micro movement, a fraction of a second, but it hit Mason like a shock. She reached past him for the cloth. Her fingers brushed the inside of his wrist. His skin burned where she touched him. He snatched his hand back as if he'd been scalded. Saren paused, her hand hovering in the air. She looked at his wrist, then at his face. A slow, knowing look. Careful, Mr. Vale, she murmured. You might shatter. Mason retreated to the kitchen, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He needed a drink, a real one. He opened the cupboard above the stove, reaching for the bottle of whiskey he kept hidden behind a stack of protein rations. It was gone. In its place sat a small, spherical drone, humming contentedly. What? Mason stared. My drones detected a toxic volatile substance. Saren's voice came from the living room. She sounded amused. High sugar content, ethanol, depressive agents. They metabolized it. It is excellent for cleaning grout. Mason spun around. That was a 50-year-old single malt. You turned my scotch into cleaning fluid? Saren leaned against the doorframe, a polishing rag in her hand. She looked entirely unapologetic. It was sticky, she said deadpan. Your sadness is sticky. Mason, it gets on the furniture. We sanitized it. Mason gaped at her. Then, despite the loss of 300 credits worth of alcohol, he laughed. It was a real laugh this time, loud and barking. You are a menace, he said. I am thorough, she corrected. A high-pitched beep came from the corner of the room. Mason turned. Lumi was sitting on the floor by the window. She was holding the small, circular service bot that had been broken for 6 months. Mason had used it as a footrest. Its logic core was fried, or so the maintenance tech had told him. Lumi had her hands on the bot's chassis. Her eyes were glowing, the star rings spinning slowly. The bot was chirping. Its lights, previously dead, were cycling through a reboot sequence. How is she doing that? Mason asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Saren's amusement vanished. She crossed the room in 3 long strides, placing a hand gently on Lumi's shoulder. The child blinked, and the glow in her eyes faded. The bot beeped once more and began to hum, trundling away to sweep the floor. She has a way with machines, Saren said, her voice tight. Kethran biology. We are sensitive to electromagnetic fields. It is nothing. It was not nothing. Mason had seen tech interaction before, but that required implants, interfaces, neural jacks. The girl had done it with touch. Saren, Mason said, that isn't normal, even for a Kethran. Saren stood up, facing him. Her defenses were back up. My husband was an engineer. She takes after him. Where is he? Mason asked. Your husband. Saren hesitated. She looked at the bot moving across the floor, sweeping up dust that wasn't there. Kithra, she said. He died during relocation processing. They said it was a heart defect. He had 2 hearts. Both stopped at the same time. She looked at Mason, her eyes hard. And you? You move like a soldier, but you live like a ghost. What did you do for the Commonwealth? Mason? Logistics. Mason lied smoothly. It was the cover story he had given 1,000 times. Supply chain management, boring stuff, spreadsheets and cargo manifests. Saren studied him. She tilted her head slightly. You lie with beautiful rhythm, she said, like a song you have memorized. Mason felt a chill. She saw right through him. The news feed was running in the background again. Senator Kerr announced today that the tracking initiative will be expanded. Safety is not a passive state. Kerr told reporters, it requires vigilance. In related news, Helix Dominion stock surged another 12% following the announcement of the new border defense contract. Mason felt a sharp, stabbing pain behind his right ear. He winced, his hand flying to the spot. It was deep, inside the skull. A ping. He froze. His neural implant, the military-grade distinct hardware that was supposed to be dormant, burnt out, dead. It had pinged. It was an encrypted handshake request. Someone was knocking on the door of his mind. He looked up. Saren was watching the news feed, her expression unreadable. He looked at the time. The ping had happened the moment Saren had walked past the receiver unit near the door. It had happened last week, too. He realized. He had dismissed it as a migraine. The pattern clicked into place every time she was here. His head woke up. He stared at her. She turned, catching his gaze. "What is it?" she asked. "Nothing," Mason said, rubbing his temple. "Just a headache." Saren walked over to him. She stopped close, invading his personal space again. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "You stare at me," she said. Her voice was low. "When you think I am not looking, you stare at my mouth." Mason felt the heat rise in his neck. Do not lie about this," she whispered. She stepped closer. He could feel the heat radiating from her body. "If you want something, say it like an adult." The challenge hung in the air between them. It was a lifeline and a trap. Mason looked down at her. He wanted to kiss her. He wanted to wrap his arms around her and bury his face in her neck and forget the smell of the antiseptic corridor. But he looked at his own hands, hands that had signed orders, hands that had pulled triggers. "I want to," Mason said, his voice raw, scraping his throat. "God, I want to touch you, but I am afraid I will break what you are trying to hold together. I am not a safe thing." Saren. It was the most honest thing he had said in years. It was humiliating. Saren's eyes softened. The hardness melted away, revealing a well of exhaustion and grief that matched his own. She reached up, her fingers hovering near his jaw, but she didn't touch him. Then, the steel returned. "I don't need saving, Mason," she said firmly. "I need truth. You want to touch me? Earn it. Tell me who you really are." Mason opened his mouth to speak, to perhaps finally say the words Project Burial. But the world exploded. The vent cover in the ceiling of the hallway blew out with a concussive thud. Debris rained down. 2 figures dropped from the service duct, landing with heavy magnetic thuds on the floor. They were dressed in matte black tactical gear, faces obscured by smooth, featureless masks. No insignias, no badges, just the silent, lethal efficiency of state-level wet work. Mason didn't think. He didn't decide. His body simply remembered. The muscle memory of a decade in Black Ops took over. As the first figure raised a silenced carbine, Mason was already moving. He grabbed a heavy ceramic vase from the side table, one of Saren's peace patterns, and hurled it. The vase shattered against the first attacker's helmet, snapping his head back. Mason lunged. He didn't move like a logistics clerk. He moved like a blur. He stepped inside the attacker's guard, trapped the gun arm, and drove his elbow into the man's throat with a sickening crunch. The attacker collapsed. Mason spun, snatching the falling carbine from the air. He leveled it at the second attacker. It took less than 2 seconds. Saren stood frozen, staring at him. She saw the transformation. She saw the man who had claimed to manage spreadsheets suddenly become a weapon of war. "Mason?" she breathed. The second attacker didn't fire at Mason. He ignored him entirely. He turned toward the window, toward Lumi. The attacker raised a device, not a gun, but a scanner. It emitted a low, resonant chime. Ping. Lumi screamed, covering her ears. The sound seemed to hurt her physically. "Target confirmed." The attacker's voice was synthesized, distorted. "Subject L03 acquired." "No!" Saren moved. She didn't move like a human. She was faster. She leaped over the couch, a fluid, gravity-defying arc. She tackled the second man, her legs wrapping around his torso. She drove her thumbs into the soft seal of his neck armor. The man thrashed, throwing her off. She hit the wall hard but rolled instantly to her feet, snarling, her teeth bared. It was a feral, terrifying sound. "Get her!" Mason roared. He fired the carbine. A 3-round burst. The bullet sparked off the attacker's heavy chest plate. Body armor. High grade. "Corridor!" Mason yelled. "Go!" He grabbed Saren's arm, pulling her toward the kitchen. There was a service hatch behind the refrigerator. He had installed it himself. A paranoid bolt hole he never thought he'd use. He shoved the heavy appliance aside with a grunt of exertion. The hatch was dark. "Take Lumi," Mason ordered, shoving the carbine into Saren's hands. "Go!" "Together," Saren hissed. She grabbed Lumi with one arm and grabbed Mason's collar with the other. "We go together." More thuds from the ceiling. Reinforcements. They dove into the hatch just as the apartment filled with flashbang smoke. They ran through the undercity maintenance tunnels. The air here was thick with steam and the smell of rotting hydroponics. The tunnels were a maze of pipes and dripping concrete, lit only by emergency amber strobes. Mason led the way, limping slightly. He had taken a glancing blow to the knee during the scramble. Saren was behind him, carrying Lumi on her back. The child was silent, her face buried in Saren's coat. They ran until Mason's lungs burned and the sounds of pursuit faded into the distance. He kicked open the door to a defunct pump room and shoved Saren inside, slamming the bolt shut behind them. It was a small, cramped metal box. The only light came from the glowing interface of a rusted water cycler. Mason slid down the wall, gasping for air. He wiped his mouth and his hand came away red. He had bitten his tongue during the fight. Saren set Lumi down gently on a pile of old tarps. She checked the child quickly, pupils dilated, pulse fast, but unhurt. Then she turned to Mason. The room was tiny. They were forced close together. The adrenaline was still coursing through them, sharp and electric. "Logistics," Saren said. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving. "You are very good at filing." Mason looked up at her, blood on his teeth. He started to laugh. It was a jagged, hysterical sound. "I had a very aggressive filing system." "Humans," Saren said, shaking her head, a tremor in her voice. "You build labyrinths and call it civilization, and then you act surprised when you get lost in them." She slumped down next to him. Their shoulders touched. The heat between them wasn't just adrenaline anymore. It was survival. It was the sudden, crushing realization that they were both alive. Mason turned his head. Saren turned hers. Their faces were inches apart in the amber gloom. He could smell her sweat and the ozone of the tunnels. He could see the dilation of her pupils. His hand moved without conscious thought, cupping her shoulder to steady her. Her skin was warm through the thin fabric of her tunic. She didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch, her breath hitched. "Mason," she whispered. He leaned in. The distance closed. He could feel the ghost of her breath on his lips. He wanted this. He wanted to kiss the fear away, to anchor himself to her in the dark. "They will come again." The voice was small, terrified, and absolute. Mason and Saren broke apart instantly. Lumi was sitting up on the tarp. Her eyes were not glowing now. They were dark, filled with a child's bottomless fear. "The bad men," Lumi said. "They know the sound of my eyes." Mason stared at the girl. The scanner, he realized. They weren't scanning for ID. They were scanning for resonance. He looked at Saren. "Why? Why do they want her?" Saren looked at her daughter, then back at Mason. The vulnerability was gone from her face, replaced by a cold calculation. "Because of who her father was," Saren said. "An engineer?" Mason asked. "No," Saren said. She stood up, smoothing her coat. That was the lie I told you, just like you told me you were logistics. She looked down at him. I did not get assigned to your apartment by the algorithm. Mason, I hacked the queue. I requested your building. I requested you. Mason froze. The blood in his veins turned to ice. What? I know who you are, Saren said. Her voice was steady, void of the warmth that had been there moments ago. I saw you in the footage of my husband's death. You were there, standing in the background. Mason stood up slowly, ignoring the pain in his knee. You targeted me. Yes, Saren said. I came to find out what you knew. I came to find out if you were a monster. She looked at the door, listening for footsteps in the tunnel. I haven't decided yet, she added. Mason looked at her, the woman he had almost kissed, the woman he had just killed for. He realized with a sinking sensation that he hadn't just stumbled into a conspiracy. He was the center of it. We have to move, Mason said, his voice hollow. If you found me, they can find us. Yes, Saren agreed. She picked up Lumi. Lead the way, soldier. We are not done. She didn't look at him with affection now. She looked at him like he was a tool she might still have to break. Mason unlocked the door. He stepped out into the dark, knowing that the man who lived in the sterile apartment was gone forever. All that was left was the weapon, and the woman who held the trigger. The dripping of water in the pump room measured time like a slow, erratic metronome. Mason Vale sat on a crate of rusted hydraulic parts, his hands clasped between his knees, staring at the floor. The adrenaline of the chase had faded, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache in his chest. The specific emptiness of a man who realizes his entire life has been a carefully constructed fiction. Saranvala stood by the door, checking the locking mechanism for the third time. She turned, her silhouette sharp against the dim amber light of the emergency panel. Tell me, she said. It was not a request. You were there. The footage places you at the docking bay 3 minutes before Kale died. You were not logistics. You were intelligence. First contact security. Mason looked up. He wanted to lie. The reflex was there, hardwired into his neural pathways. But looking at Saren, at the dust on her cheek and the fierce, terrifying clarity in her eyes, he found he could not do it. Yes, Mason said. His voice sounded like it was being dragged over gravel. I was first contact, Unit 4. We handled sensitive integration, threats, high-value assets. And my husband? Saren asked, stepping closer. Was he a threat, or was he an asset? I don't know, Mason said. Saren's eyes narrowed. Do not lie to me, Mason. You were there. I was there, but I don't remember, Mason snapped, the frustration cracking his composure. He stood up, pacing the small room. There is a hole in my head, Saren, a 6-month void where my life should be. I remember the academy. I remember the promotion. Then I remember waking up in a hospital bed with a commendation for service I couldn't recall and a pension I didn't earn. I told myself it was trauma. I told myself I was lucky. He stopped, facing her. But I wasn't lucky. I was erased. Lumi, who had been sitting quietly in the corner with a piece of chalk she had found in Mason's coat pocket, made a soft sound. They both turned. The child had been drawing on the rusted metal wall. It was not a child's drawing. There were no stick figures, no houses. It was a map. Lumi had sketched a complex 3-dimensional star chart using a series of spirals and dots. The perspective was impossible. It showed a sector of space not from the view of a planet, but from the view of something traveling between them. Mason stared at the wall. The blood drained from his face. "That is the Antares Drift," he whispered. "That is a restricted sector. Nav computers need top-level clearance just to store those coordinates." Lumi tapped a specific spiral on the wall. "Home," she said softly. Then she tapped a dark void near the edge of the drawing. "Here, the bad place, the silence." Saren looked at the drawing, then at Mason. "She has never seen a star map. We taught her to read, not to navigate warp lanes." "It's genetic memory," Mason muttered, stepping closer to the wall. "Or something else. Whatever they wanted from your husband, Saren. It wasn't just engineering specs, it's biological. They are hunting her because she is the map." "Then we need to know where the map leads," Saren said. "And you are the only one who has been to the silence." "I told you I don't remember," Mason said. "Then we make you remember," Saren said. Her voice was cold, pragmatic. "You have friends in the Undercity, people who fix broken things." Mason hesitated. He did have a friend. Or rather, he had someone he hadn't killed yet. "Imani," he said. "Dr. Imani Reyes. If anyone can crack a military seal without liquefying my brain, it is her." "Take us," Saren commanded. The clinic was located in the sub-basement of a hydroponics tower, hidden behind a laundry service that smelled of ozone and wet wool. Mason knocked on the steel door, a specific rhythmic code, 3 fast, 2 slow. A slat slid open. A pair of dark, suspicious eyes glared out. "Go away," a woman's voice rasped. "We don't buy from solicitors, and we don't treat venereal diseases on Tuesdays." "Imani," Mason said. "It's Vale." The eyes widened, then they narrowed into slits of pure fury. "You have 5 seconds to run before I activate the perimeter turrets." "I have a Catherine child with me," Mason said quickly. "And her mother. We are in trouble. Imani." The slat slammed shut. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, the heavy locking mechanism groaned, and the door swung inward. Dr. Imani Reyes stood there, wiping grease from her hands onto a lab coat that had seen better decades. She was short, fierce, with cybernetic weaving visible along her neck and a shock of white hair that defied gravity. "You disappear for 2 years," Imani said, pointing a wrench at Mason's chest. "No call, no message. I thought you were dead. I hoped you were dead. It would have been a better excuse." "I was trying to be dead," Mason said. "It didn't stick." Imani looked past him to Saren and Lumi. Her expression softened instantly. She stepped back. "Get in. Quickly." The clinic was a chaotic masterpiece of repurposed junk. Surgical robots hung from the ceiling like bats. Piles of sensory relays cluttered the tables. In the corner, a toaster with optical sensors tracked their movement with disturbing intelligence. "Don't mind the appliances," Imani grumbled, kicking a vacuum cleaner that tried to nuzzle her leg. "I get bored. I tinker. Sit down. Vale." Mason sat in the central chair, a repurposed dentist's chair with restraint straps. "Scan him," Saren said. She stood by the door, her hand resting near the cleaning nozzle she still carried like a weapon. "He has a memory block." Imani pulled a scanner array over Mason's head. "A block? Mason, what did you get yourself into?" "Just scan it." "Imani." The machine hummed. Holographic slices of Mason's brain appeared in the air above them. Imani manipulated the image, her fingers dancing through the light. She stopped. Her breath hissed through her teeth. "Well," Imani said, her voice dropping. "That is not good." "What is it?" Mason asked. "It is a seal," Imani said, but not a medical one. This is military encryption, deep cortical weaving. It is designed to suppress specific episodic memory chains. She looked at Mason, her face pale. This is Project Burial Tech. Saren made a sound, a sharp intake of breath that sounded like a sob choked off before it could start. Burial, Saren whispered. Mason looked at her. You know it? Kale spoke of it, Saren said, her voice trembling with a rage she was struggling to contain. 2 days before they took him, he said the Commonwealth had a program, a way to make witnesses disappear without killing them, a way to make soldiers do terrible things and then sleep soundly at night because they forgot they did them. She looked at Mason with a look of pure betrayal. You didn't just forget, Mason. You let them do this to you. You chose to be blind. I didn't know it was called burial, Mason said, defensiveness rising in his throat. I just wanted the noise to stop. Cowardice. Saren spat the word. A loud clatter interrupted them. Lumi was standing by a workbench. She was holding a diagnostic drone that had been dismantled into its component parts. Hey! Imani shouted. Kid, don't touch that! The logic core is unstable. It will... Lumi stared at the drone parts. The star rings in her eyes flared. She didn't use tools. She just touched the components, humming a low, dissonant note. The drone parts clicked together. The casing snapped shut. The drone hovered into the air, its lights turning a calm, steady blue. It flew over to Imani and chirped a happy, harmonious sequence. Imani stared at the drone, then at Lumi, then at the toaster which was now making perfectly browned toast without being plugged in. Great, Imani muttered, rubbing her temples. The kid is a walking IT department. My insurance does not cover mystical alien tech support. She turned back to Mason. Look, Vale, I can crack this seal, but I cannot do it with a wrench and good intentions. This is quantum encrypted. I need the cipher key. Where is the key? Mason asked. There is a master database for Project Burial, Imani said. It is kept offline for obvious reasons. It is stored in the data vault on the Senate Orbital Annex. The Orbital Annex, Mason said, closing his eyes. That is a fortress. It is where the senators keep their mistresses and their black budgets. Then we go to the Annex, Saren said. We? Mason looked at her. Saren, that is a suicide run. You are a refugee. I am a ghost. We can't just walk into the most secure station in orbit. We do not walk in as guests, Saren said. We walk in as the help. The plan was madness, but it was the specific kind of madness that relied on the arrogance of the powerful. The Orbital Annex employed thousands of service workers, cleaners, cooks, maintenance technicians. They were the invisible circulatory system of the station, ignored by the elite who walked the corridors. Saren still had her credentials, and Mason, with Imani's help, forged a set for himself. I hate this, Mason said 12 hours later. They were standing in the service airlock of the Orbital Annex. Mason was wearing a gray jumpsuit that itched. Saren was wearing her cleaner's tunic, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. Lumi was hidden in a laundry cart, buried under a pile of synthetic linens. Stop complaining, Saren said. You look credible. You have the downtrodden slump of a man with no pension. That is my natural posture, Mason muttered. They moved through the station. It was a world of blinding white and gold. The floors were polished to a mirror sheen. Through the viewports, the curve of the planet below was a breathtaking swirl of blue and white, but no one looked at it. They passed a group of senators standing in a wide corridor, holding glasses of champagne. Ethics are a fluid concept, Senator Kerr was saying, his voice booming with practiced gravitas. We must consider the greater stability of the Commonwealth if a few freedoms are curtailed to ensure safety. Is that not a noble sacrifice? Mason watched as a cleaner on her hands and knees scrubbed a scuff mark off the floor inches from Kerr's boot. Kerr didn't even glance down. He stepped over her hand as if she were a piece of furniture. "They do not see us," Saren whispered to Mason. "They look right through us." Mason looked at her. Saren was pushing the laundry cart, but she wasn't walking like a servant. Her chin was high, her movements fluid and precise. She walked like a queen in exile, disguised in rags. "I see you," Mason said. Saren didn't look at him, but her grip on the cart tightened. They reached the maintenance sector near the data vault. The corridor was empty. "Lumi," Saren whispered. The laundry pile shifted. Lumi poked her head out. "The door," Saren said. Lumi looked at the heavy blast door of the server room. It had a keypad, a retinal scanner, and a voice print lock. Lumi climbed out of the cart. She walked to the door and placed her small hand on the cold metal. Her eyes shimmered. Click. Whir. Thunk. The lights on the lock turned green. The heavy door slid open. "I am never getting used to that," Mason whispered. They slipped inside. The server room was a forest of humming black towers, kept at 0 degrees. "The interface is there." Mason pointed to a console on the far wall. "I need 3 minutes to extract the cipher." "We don't have 3 minutes," Saren said. "Patrols cycle every 2. "Then buy me time," Mason said. He plugged a data spike into the console and began typing furiously. Saren stood guard, watching the door. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. "Why did you do it, Mason?" Saren asked suddenly. Her voice echoed in the cold room. Mason didn't stop typing. "Do what?" "Erase yourself. Was the truth so terrible? Or were you just weak?" Mason froze. His hands hovered over the keys. "I wasn't weak," he said low. "I was broken. There is a difference." "Is there?" Saren turned to face him. "I watched them drag my husband away. I heard him scream. I remember every second of it. I wake up every night hearing it. I carry that weight because I have to. Because I owe it to him to remember. You threw your memory away because it was inconvenient." "It wasn't inconvenience," Mason spun around. "It was guilt. Saren, crushing, absolute guilt. I couldn't look in a mirror. I couldn't sleep. I wanted to die. Project Burial was the only way I could stay alive." "Then you should have died," Saren said. Her eyes were burning. "Better to be a dead man with honor than a living shell with none." "I am here now," Mason shouted, then lowered his voice instantly. "I am here, helping you. Doesn't that count for anything?" "Not if you are only doing it to fix your own head," Saren said. "Don't apologize to me. Mason, choose. Choose who you are. Are you the man who forgets, or the man who fights?" The console beeped. "You got it," Mason said, pulling the spike. "I have the key." A red light began to flash on the ceiling, a silent alarm. "We triggered a localized alert," Mason said. "We have to move." They ran. They exited the server room and ducked into a narrow maintenance bay just as a squad of security guards jogged past the intersection. Mason pulled Saren and Lumi behind a massive humming reactor panel. The space was tight. Mason was pressed against the wall. Saren pressed against him. Lumi was crouched at their feet. The reactor hummed, a vibration that went through their bones. Saren's face was inches from his. He could see the gold flecks in her violet eyes. He could feel the rapid rise and fall of her chest against his. The anger from their argument was still there, but in the cramped, heated darkness, it transmuted into something else, something volatile. Mason looked at her mouth. The desire hit him like a physical blow, a sudden, desperate need to bridge the distance between them, to prove he was real, to prove he was there. His hand slid to her waist. His fingers dug into the fabric of her tunic. Saren didn't pull away. Her breath hitched. Her gaze dropped to his lips. "Mason," she breathed. He leaned in. He was going to kiss her. He didn't care about the guards. He didn't care about the mission. Saren's hand came up. 2 fingers pressed against his lip, stopping him. "No," she whispered. Her voice was trembling, but her eyes were clear. "Not like thieves. Not here. Not while you are still hiding from yourself." Mason closed his eyes, resting his forehead against hers. He breathed in her scent, ozone and determination. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." "Clear," Lumi said from below. They pulled apart. The moment shattered, leaving the air charged and heavy. They moved back into the corridor, heading for the extraction point. They turned a corner and stopped dead. Blocking the hallway was a phalanx of 6 heavily armed troopers. In front of them stood a woman. She was tall, wearing a crisp white uniform with the golden epaulets of the High Command. Her hair was silver, cut in a sharp, severe bob. Her eyes were cold blue ice, Director Sloan Marr. She looked at Mason, and a slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. "Mason," she said. Her voice was like silk over steel. "You look terrible, darling. Civilian life does not suit you." Mason felt a wave of nausea. The voice. He knew that voice. It was the voice from his nightmares. "Sloan," Mason said. "Director Marr to you," she corrected. She took a step forward. "I was wondering when the tracker in your skull would finally lead us to something interesting. I must say, bringing the Catherine Prize right to my doorstep was very efficient. You always were my best agent." Saren stiffened. She looked at Mason. "Tracker? We never really let you go, Mason," Sloan purred. "We erased the trauma, yes, but we kept the leash. We erased you to protect the Commonwealth, but we kept you on standby just in case." Saren took a step away from Mason. The betrayal on her face was total. "You led them to us," she whispered. "You are still one of them." "No," Mason said, panic rising. "No. Saren, I didn't know, I swear." "Take the child," Sloan ordered. "Kill the mother. Reprocess Agent Vale." The troopers raised their weapons. "Run!" Mason yelled. He didn't run away. He ran forward. He tackled the nearest trooper, driving his shoulder into the man's solar plexus. The gun went off, the shot going wild into the ceiling. "Saren, go!" Saren didn't leave him. She grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and swung it with lethal force, cracking the helmet of another guard. "Lumi!" Saren shouted. "Open it!" Lumi looked at the airlock door to their right. It was a maintenance airlock, sealed for vacuum. Lumi's eyes flared blindingly bright. The door groaned. The emergency bolts sheared off with a screech of tearing metal. The door flew open. The sudden pressure drop was violent. Air roared out of the corridor. The troopers, caught off guard, were knocked off their feet. "Mag boots!" Mason shouted, slamming his hand against a locking panel on the wall. He grabbed Saren's hand. Saren grabbed Lumi. They were sucked into the zero-gravity vacuum of the maintenance shaft. Silence. Absolute silence. They floated in the void, the stars spinning dizzyingly around them. The station's artificial gravity was gone here. "The shuttle," Mason gasped into his comms. He had grabbed a headset from the downed trooper. "It's in Bay 4. We have to drift." They kicked off the wall, propelling themselves through the zero-G shaft. Behind them, armored figures were emerging, their suit thrusters firing. Plasma bolts streaked past them, silent lines of burning green. "Lumi, hold on!" Saren cried, shielding the child with her body. They crashed into the landing bay. Mason hit the deck hard. rolling to absorb the impact as gravity reasserted itself. A smuggler's corvette, a battered, ugly thing Imani had arranged, sat on the pad. "Get in!" Mason shoved Saren toward the ramp. He turned and fired 3 shots at the pursuing guards, suppressing them just long enough. He scrambled up the ramp. The door hissed shut. "Cockpit!" Mason yelled, sprinting to the front. He jumped into the pilot's seat. The console was a mess of unfamiliar controls and jury-rigged wiring. "Can you fly this?" Saren asked, strapping Lumi into the crash seat. Mason looked at the controls. His mind was blank. He didn't know this ship, but his hands knew. His fingers flew across the panel, flipping toggles, priming the reactor, balancing the thruster output. It wasn't thought, it was pure muscle memory. The skills of a pilot who had flown 1,000 missions. "Hold on," Mason said. He punched the throttle. The Corvette screamed out of the bay, blasting past the station's defense turrets. Mason rolled the ship, dodging a salvo of missiles with a maneuver so precise it made Saren gasp. They hit the jump limit. Mason engaged the warp drive. The stars stretched into lines of light. The station vanished. They were safe. Mason slumped back in the chair, his hands shaking. He looked at them. They were the hands of a killer, the hands of a pilot, the hands of a man who belonged to Sloan Marr. He turned the chair around. Saren was unbuckling Lumi. She looked at Mason. Her expression was guarded, wary. "You flew like an ace," she said. "Like you have done it all your life." "I have," Mason said quietly. "I just forgot." He reached into his pocket. "I got it. The cipher key." He held up the data spike. Saren didn't take it. She reached into her own tunic. "I have something too," she said. She pulled out a ring, a simple band of Kethrin metal. "I found this in the laundry cart," she said. "When we were hiding, it must have fallen out of your pocket." Mason frowned. "I don't have a ring." "It was inside the lining of your old jacket," Saren said. "The one Lumi opened the cabinet for. I found it when I was cleaning." She placed the ring on the console. "It is Kethrin," she said. "My husband's ring." Mason stared at it. "How?" "Lumi activated it," Saren said. "Look." She tapped the ring. A hologram flickered to life. It was small, blue, and grainy. A face appeared, a Kethrin man. Sharp features, kind eyes, Kale. He was speaking hurriedly, looking over his shoulder. "If you are seeing this," Kale's voice said, tinny but clear, "then they have taken my voice. I do not have much time. I have hidden the coordinates in the child, but I cannot protect her alone." The hologram of Kale looked directly into the camera. "I have made a deal," Kale said, "with a human, an agent. He is part of the machine, but his heart is breaking. He promised to help me. He promised to hide the truth even from himself, so they could not take it from him." Mason stopped breathing. "Trust the man who forgot," Kale said, "because forgetting was his punishment. It was the price he paid to keep the secret safe." The hologram flickered and died. Silence filled the cockpit. Saren stared at the empty space where her husband's face had been. Then she looked at Mason. The realization hit them both at the same time. Mason hadn't erased his memory to hide from his guilt. He had erased it to hide the conspiracy. He had erased it to protect the secret Kale had entrusted to him. "You knew him," Saren whispered. Tears spilled over her cheeks. "You didn't kill him. You tried to save him." Mason looked at his hands. The shaking stopped. "I don't remember him," Mason said, his voice cracking. "But I think I liked him." Saren reached out. She took Mason's hand. This time, she didn't stop. She interlaced her fingers with his. "Then we will find out why," she said. "We will unlock your head. Mason, and we will finish what you two started. Mason looked out at the infinite streak of starlight. For the first time in 2 years, the void didn't look empty. It looked like a path. To the silence, Mason said. To the truth, Saren answered. The smuggler's Corvette smelled of recycled air and ancient engine grease, a sharp contrast to the sterile, burning scent filling the medbay. Mason Vale lay strapped to the diagnostic table, his body arching against the restraints as the neural interface screamed into his cortex. On the holographic display above him, Dr. Imani Reyes's face was distorted by the long-range transmission lag, but her anxiety was high definition. "Hold him down!" Imani's voice crackled through the speakers. "The encryption is fighting back. It is designed to burn out the host rather than release the data. I have to tear the walls down brick by brick." Saren stood by the table. She was not touching him. Imani had warned that biofeedback could kill them both right now, but her hands were hovering inches from his thrashing shoulders, trembling. "He is dying," Saren said, her voice tight. "He is remembering," Imani corrected grimly. "For men like Mason, there is no difference." Mason did not hear them. He was drowning in a white room. Flash. He was standing in the negotiation chamber of the orbital outpost. The air smelled of expensive filtered oxygen and lying. He was younger, his uniform crisp, his eyes bright with a patriotism that felt nauseating in hindsight. Across the table sat the Kethrin delegation. They were tall, elegant, robes shimmering with starlight weaves. They were smiling. They had brought gifts. They believed this was a trade agreement. Flash. Mason saw his own hand on the table. He was sliding a data pad forward. It was not a trade agreement. It was a containment protocol. "For your safety," the Mason in the memory said. His voice was calm, reasonable. "Relocation is necessary for integration." Flash. The doors burst open. Not soldiers, but Helix Dominion contractors in unmarked armor. The screaming started instantly. It wasn't a battle, it was a harvest. Mason saw a child. She was small, clinging to a woman who looked like Saren. The child turned, and her eyes were vast, filled with spinning rings of light. She screamed, a sound that shattered the glass of the observation deck. A soldier grabbed the child. The mother lunged. The soldier fired. Mason watched himself. He did not draw his weapon. He did not scream. He stood still, checking the time on his wrist comp, ensuring the operation remained on schedule. Flash. Real-world Mason convulsed, a guttural roar tearing from his throat. Blood trickled from his nose, dark and heavy. "Mason!" Saren grabbed his shoulders, ignoring Imani's warning. "Mason, look at me. It is a ghost. It is not real anymore." Mason's eyes snapped open. They were blown wide, seeing nothing but the ceiling of the Corvette. He gasped, sucking in air like a drowning man breaking the surface. "I stood there," he whispered, the words bubbling up with blood. "I stood there and I checked the time." Saren froze. She looked at the holographic monitor, where fragmented images of the memory were still playing out in jagged bursts of static. She saw the soldier. She saw the mother fall. She saw Mason checking his watch. She backed away from the table, revulsion warring with a terrible, aching pity. "Saren," Mason rasped, his head lolling to the side to find her. "I didn't know. I didn't know they would kill her." "You did not care to know," Saren said softly. The anger was there, but it was dull, buried under exhaustion. She hated herself for the instinct that made her want to wipe the blood from his face. She needed to be ruthless. She needed to be a weapon for her daughter. But looking at the ruin of the man on the table, she felt her defenses crumbling. The file is open, Imani said, her voice softer now. I have the root directory. Mason, listen to me. This wasn't just a military operation, and look at the funding codes. Mason blinked, his vision clearing. Data streamed across the display. Helix Dominion, Mason read, the name tasting like ash. They paid for the relocation. They paid for the soldiers. Refugee fear, Saren said, stepping back to the console, reading the scrolling text. They engineered it. The riots in Sector 7, the border breaches, all staged. To drive up the defense budget, Mason said. Senator Kerr pushed for the Refugee Integration Act to create a legal supply of bodies, and Helix Dominion manufactured the threat to justify the cost. They created a war so they could sell the solution. And Project Burial, Imani added, was the janitor. It erased the witnesses. It erased the soldiers who had a conscience. It rewrote history in real time. Saren stared at the screen. Kale found this. He found the budget transfer. That is why he was processed. He wasn't an engineer caught in an accident. He was a loose end. She looked down at her hands. And they let me live. Why? Because a grieving widow is a great prop for the news feeds, Mason said, sitting up slowly. The pain in his head was receding to a dull throb. And because they put you in a program where they could watch you, your cleaning job wasn't charity. Saren, it was a leash. The silence in the small ship was heavy, suffocating. Mason tried to stand and stumbled. Saren moved before she thought, catching him. Her arm went around his waist, taking his weight. He flinched, then leaned into her. He smelled of sweat and copper blood. She smelled of ozone and something softer, like rain. You are heavy, she muttered, bracing herself against the bulkhead. And you are sarcastic, Mason mumbled, his speech slurring slightly from the neural feedback. Your sarcasm is the first thing that has felt real in 2 years. Everyone else is just polite noise. Saren let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. You are delirious. You are complimenting my bad attitude. It is a great attitude, Mason said. Very efficient. She dragged him to the small crew mess and deposited him on a bench. She grabbed a med patch and slapped it onto his neck with a little more force than necessary. Ow, Mason complained. Suffering builds character, Saren said, but her hands lingered on his neck, her thumb brushing the pulse point beneath his jaw. The humor faded, leaving the air thin and charged. Mason looked up at her. His eyes were clear now, stripped of the fog that had covered them since she met him. Saren, he said. She didn't pull away. What? I have not held anyone in a long time, Mason said. I mean, really held them. I thought it was because I was cold, but it wasn't. It was because I was afraid. Saren looked at his hands, resting on his knees. They were scarred, dangerous hands. I have not been touched since Kale died, she admitted, the words barely a whisper. I forgot that skin can feel something other than the cold. My hands are weapons, Mason said, looking at his palms with disgust. I touch things and they break. I am not a thing, Saren said fiercely, and I do not break easily. She stepped between his knees. The movement was a challenge. Mason reached out. His hands trembled as they touched her waist. He looked at her for permission. Saren gave it with a small nod. He pulled her closer. She buried her hands in his hair, gripping tight. The kiss was not gentle. It was desperate. It tasted of blood and grief and the terrifying realization that they were the only two people in the universe who knew the truth. It was a collision of two broken things trying to form a whole. Mason groaned low in his throat, his arms tightening around her, pulling her against the hard line of his chest. Saren responded with a fierceness that matched him, her mouth opening to him, demanding his breath because she couldn't find her own. For a moment, the conspiracy didn't exist. The past didn't exist. There was only the heat of contact, the friction of life against life. They broke apart, chests heaving, foreheads resting against each other. "We should stop," Mason whispered, though he didn't let go. "Yes," Saren breathed. "Lumi." They both looked toward the cockpit. Lumi was strapped into the navigator's chair, staring out the viewport, but she wasn't looking at the ship. She was looking at the void. Saren and Mason pulled away from each other, the loss of contact physically painful, and walked quickly to the cockpit. Lumi was rigid. Her eyes were not blinking. The star rings within her irises were spinning so fast they looked like solid discs of white fire. "Sector 4, Lumi said. Her voice was not the voice of a child. It was the flat, resonant cadence of a computer or a god. "Quadrant 9, the intersection of dust. The gate remains closed." "Lumi." Saren touched her daughter's shoulder. Lumi did not react. "The key is present. The lock waits. Coordinates 77 Alpha 9. "Those are deep space vectors," Mason said, checking the navcom. "That is the middle of nowhere, an unregistered moon near the Antares Drift." "That is where the ruins are," Saren said. "The place Kale spoke of?" Suddenly, the ship shuddered violently. The lights flickered and died, replaced by the crimson strobe of emergency alerts. "Proximity alert," Mason shouted, diving for the pilot's seat. "Something just dropped out of warp right on top of us." "Is it a patrol?" Saren asked, grabbing Lumi, who blinked and slumped, the trance broken. "No," Mason said, looking at the sensor readings. "It is a heavy cruiser, Commonwealth flagship class. It is the Aegis." The comms unit crackled to life. "Unidentified vessel," a voice said. It was calm, polite, and terrifying. "This is Director Sloan Marr. You are operating in a restricted zone. Prepare to be boarded when we have a warrant." "They found us," Mason said. "How did they find us?" "The beacon," Saren realized. "When I used the ring, it must have tracked us." A deep, resonant thrum vibrated through the hull. "Boarding clamps," Mason said. "We are locked down." The airlock hissed. There was no time to run, no time to hide. The door blew inward. Soldiers poured in. These were not the Black Ops mercenaries from the apartment. These were high guard, white armor, gold trim. Their rifles hummed with a high-pitched whine that made Saren's teeth ache, anti-alien frequencies designed to disrupt Kithran nervous systems. Saren fell to her knees, clutching her head as the sound hit her. Lumi screamed. Director Sloan Marr walked onto the bridge. She looked impeccable, not a hair out of place. She stepped over Saren as if she were a rug. "Turn off the suppression field," Sloan ordered. "We are civilized people." The humming stopped. Saren gasped, pulling Lumi into her arms. Sloan smiled. She looked at Saren. "Mrs. Vala," she said. "I apologize for the noise. My men are overzealous." She held out a data pad. "I am authorized to offer you a deal," Sloan said pleasantly. "Full citizenship, Class A, a pension equal to a senator's, a villa in the Cloud Gardens, total immunity for all crimes, including the theft of state secrets." Saren stared at her. "And the price?" "The child," Sloan said. She didn't look at Lumi. She referred to her as an object. "We will take custody of the subject. She will be treated well. She is valuable." "She is my daughter," Saren spat. "She is a biological interface for a weapon system we do not understand," Sloan corrected. "She is a matter of national security. You can be a rich citizen, Saren, or you can be a dead terrorist. The choice is yours." The cruelty was perfect. It was bureaucratic. It was smiling. Saren stood up. She pulled Lumi behind her. She looked Sloane in the eye. "Go to hell," Saren said. Sloane sighed. "A disappointing choice." She snapped her fingers. 2 guards moved. They didn't strike Saren. They used a stasis baton, jamming it into her side. Saren crumpled, paralyzed but conscious. "No!" Mason lunged from the pilot's seat. He didn't make it 2 steps. A guard slammed the butt of a rifle into his face. Mason went down hard, blood spraying across the deck. "Collect the asset," Sloane said. A guard grabbed Lumi. The child kicked and screamed, reaching for her mother. "Mama, Mama!" Saren tried to move, but her body wouldn't obey. She could only watch, tears streaming down her face as they dragged her daughter away. Mason pushed himself up on shaking arms. He looked at Sloane. "You can't do this," he snarled. "There are laws. Protocol 7 Alpha explicitly forbids family separation during..." He stopped. The words died in his throat. Sloane looked down at him, her smile widening. "Protocol 7 Alpha?" she asked softly. "You know it well. Mason, you wrote it." The memory hit him like a physical blow. A desk, late night, coffee cold. He was drafting a document. "In cases of high-value biological assets, familial bonds are secondary to security containment." He wrote it. He authorized it. The very rulebook they were using to steal Lumi was signed by Mason Vale. The guilt did not just break him, it obliterated him. He collapsed against the bulkhead. He watched the airlock door close. Lumi was gone. "Leave them," Sloane said over her shoulder. "The ship is rigged to blow in 2 minutes. Let the vacuum clean up the mess." The flagship detached. The corvette's reactor began to whine, a rising pitch of overload. Mason lay on the floor. He wanted to die. He deserved to die. He closed his eyes, welcoming the end. A hand grabbed his collar. "Get up." It was Saren. The paralysis was fading, leaving her trembling but moving. "Mason, get up." "Let it burn," Mason whispered. "I did this. I wrote the order. I am the monster. Saren." Saren slapped him. It wasn't a hard slap, but it was shocking. "I know," she screamed at him. "I heard you. But if you die now, you are just a coward again. You do not get to quit, Mason. You do not get to leave me alone in this." She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. Her eyes were wild, terrifying. "Live," she commanded. "Fix it." She dragged him toward the escape pods. Mason stumbled after her, his legs moving on automatic. They fell into the pod. Saren punched the launch sequence. The pod ejected seconds before the corvette disintegrated in a blossom of silent fire. They crashed on the unregistered moon. It was a desolate rock, gray dust and jagged peaks under a sky bruised with purple nebula clouds. The pod lay smoking in a crater. They climbed out. The air was thin but breathable. In front of them, looming in the shadow of a massive ridge, were the ruins. They were not buildings. They were geometric shapes grown from the rock itself, spiraling towers of black crystal that hummed with a low, thrumming vibration. Mason fell to his knees in the dust. The escape was over and the adrenaline was gone. There was only the silence of the moon and the noise in his head. "I can't," he sobbed. He curled into himself, pressing his forehead into the gray dirt. "I don't deserve to be here. I don't deserve you. I don't deserve forgiveness." He waited for her to agree. He waited for her to leave him there. Saren knelt beside him. She didn't touch him at first. She just looked at the ruins, then at him. "You are right," she said. "You do not deserve it. You built the machine that ate my life." Mason flinched. "But I do not desire you because you are safe." "Mason," Saren said. Her voice was steady, hard as the rock beneath them. "I do not desire you because you are innocent." She reached out and took his hand, pulling it away from his face. She interlaced her fingers with his, dirty and blood-stained. "I desire you because you are trying," she said. "Because when you remembered who you were, you did not run back to them. You stayed. You are choosing to be better. And that is harder than being good." Mason looked at her. "How can you look at me?" "Because I see the man who flew through an asteroid field to save my daughter," Saren said. "Now stand up. We have work to do." Mason stood. He was shaking, but he was standing. They walked toward the ruins. As they crossed the threshold of the outer ring, the black crystal towers began to pulse. A console in the center of the plaza, a slab of obsidian that looked older than the human race, flickered to life. It didn't project a map. It didn't project data. It projected a single complex pattern of light, a iris. It was Lumi's eye signature. The ruins groaned. The ground beneath their feet vibrated. The entire moon seemed to be waking up. "It knows her," Mason whispered, staring at the hologram. "No," Saren said, fear and awe mixing in her voice. "It is not just tracking her. Mason, look at the energy flow." She pointed to the base of the console. The light wasn't coming from the machine to the image. It was pulsing as if waiting for a command. "She is not just a battery," Saren said. "She is the key. These ruins. They are waiting for her order." The projection shifted, pointing a beam of light toward the sky, directly toward the fading ion trail of Sloane's flagship. "They took the key," Mason said, his voice hardening, the soldier finally overtaking the bureaucrat. "Now we go kick down the door." The Helix Dominion research station was not built. It was surgically inserted into the crust of the moon. It was a blister of white composite and reinforced glass, hidden deep within the shadow of a jagged crater rim, invisible to long-range scanners but glaringly obvious once one crossed the perimeter. Mason Vale lay flat on a ridge of gray dust, peering through digital binoculars. Beside him, Sarenvala was a statue of stillness, her breathing so shallow it barely stirred the dust. "It is a fortress," Mason whispered. 3 perimeter layers, automated turrets, and that is just what is above ground. "My daughter is in there," Saren said. Her voice was void of inflection, which terrified Mason more than if she had been screaming. "So we are going in." Mason lowered the binoculars. The old instincts were firing, the cold mathematical part of his brain that assessed risk and casualty rates. He hated that part of himself. He hated that his first thought was impossible odds rather than save the child. "The ventilation exchange," Mason said, pointing to a thermal exhaust port venting steam into the vacuum. "It cycles every 12 minutes. If we time it right, we can ride the pressure drop down to the maintenance sublevels." "You sound like a professional," Saren noted. "I am a professional," Mason said bitterly. "I am a professional monster." "Good," Saren said, turning to look at him. "Be a monster for us, Mason. We do not need a saint right now." The infiltration was a descent into a nightmare of sterile cruelty. The interior of the station smelled of antiseptic and ozone, a scent that triggered flashbang memories in Mason's mind with every breath. They moved through the corridors like ghosts, Mason disabling security nodes with a terrifying familiarity. He knew exactly where the blind spots were because he knew the men who designed these systems. He knew their paranoia. They reached an observation deck overlooking the central laboratory. It was a cavernous space, dominated by a massive spiraling structure of Kithran technology. Black crystal shards suspended in a magnetic field. And in the center, trapped inside a transparent containment cell, was Lumi. She was hooked up to machines. Wires adhered to her temples, her small chest, her wrists. She looked tiny against the scale of the machinery. Around the cell, a group of people stood in a semicircle. Mason recognized the cut of their suits. Politicians, lobbyists. Subject L03 is responding well to the stimuli, a scientist in a white coat was saying, gesturing to Lumi as if she were a new engine prototype. Note the ocular resonance. The rings in the iris act as biometric keys. When we apply voltage, the ancient architecture responds. Senator Kerr was there, nodding sagely, holding a glass of sparkling water. Fascinating. And the pain levels? Manageable, the scientist said dismissively. The subject is resilient. Catherine physiology is surprisingly durable. Mason felt Saren stiffen beside him. He grabbed her arm, holding her back. Not yet, he hissed. There are 12 guards on the floor. If we go now, she dies in the crossfire. Saren was shaking. They are talking about her like she is a thing. I know, Mason said. We will burn it down, I promise. But we need to disable the lockdown protocols first. They moved to a secondary server room. Mason plugged his data pad into the terminal, his fingers flying across the keys. Every firewall he breached, every camera loop he froze, felt like another layer of dirt on his soul. He was using the tools of the enemy. He was good at this. He was too good at this. I blocked the silent alarm, Mason muttered. I am routing the security feed to a loop of an empty hallway. You are very handy, Saren said. Remind me to never let you near my bank account. Mason looked up. It was a joke, a small, dry, terrible joke. I am serious, Saren said, though her eyes were wet. You are scaring me. Mason, you fit in here. I know, Mason said. I am sorry. Don't be sorry, Saren said. Just be fast. Mason accessed the internal archives. He was looking for the cell release codes. Instead, he found a file marked interrogation, subject V01. He froze. Saren, he warned. Don't look. Saren pushed him aside. Play it. The screen flickered to life. It was a recording dated 2 years ago. A man sat in a chair, bolted to the floor. He was Catherine. He was bruised, one eye swollen shut, his lips split, but his posture was upright, dignified. Kyle. Tell us the cipher, an off-screen voice demanded. Tell us how to activate the gate. I told you, Kyle's voice rasped. It is not a machine you drive. It is a legacy you inherit. You cannot steal it. We can take your family, the voice threatened. We have them located, the woman, the child. Kyle lifted his head. He looked directly into the camera lens. Then you will never open the gate, Kyle said calmly. Because if you touch them, the interface will lock forever. My death is the only key you get. The recording ended with the sound of a pistol charging. Saren stared at the blank screen. She did not scream. She did not cry. She simply collapsed, her legs giving way as if her bones had turned to water. Mason caught her. He pulled her into his chest, sliding down the wall until they were sitting on the cold floor. He didn't say anything. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't tell her it would be okay. He just held her. He pressed his face into her hair. He felt her shaking, a vibration that went through his own chest. He knew, Saren whispered. He knew he was dying, and he didn't give you up. No, Mason said. He was brave. He was better than all of us. Saren pulled back. Her face was a mask of grief, but her eyes were dry now. He is gone. I cannot save him. She stood up, pulling Mason with her. But I can save her. They moved toward the supply closet that connected to the main lab. Inside, among racks of sterile suits and cleaning chemicals, the reality of what they were about to do hit them. They were 2 people against a battalion. They were likely going to die in the next 10 minutes. Mason checked the charge on his stolen rifle. His hands were trembling. Saren saw it. She reached out and covered his hands with hers. "Mason," she said. He looked at her. In the harsh fluorescent light, she was beautiful. Not in a soft way, but in the way a storm is beautiful. "We are going to die," Mason said. "Maybe?" Saren said. She stepped closer. The space was tiny. They were pressed together, thigh to thigh. "I do not want to die hungry," Saren whispered. She leaned her forehead against his. Mason closed his eyes. He could feel her breath on his skin. He wanted her. The desire was a sudden, violent ache, a need to consume and be consumed, to prove that they were alive, that they were flesh and blood and not just data points in a conspiracy. He shifted his grip on the rifle, freeing one hand to cup the back of her neck. He pulled her closer. "Saren," he breathed. "Not yet," Saren whispered against his lips. After we get her," Saren said. "After we stop them. After we burn this place to the ground. Then, Mason, then you can have all of me." It was a promise. It was a command. Mason nodded. He pulled away. The loss of contact, physical and sharp. "After," he agreed. He kicked the door open. The alarm he triggered wasn't silent. It was a scream. "Fire!" Mason yelled, throwing a smoke grenade into the lab. The room filled with thick, white fog. Mason moved into it, firing controlled bursts. He didn't aim to kill, he aimed to suppress. He shot out the lights. He shot out the control panels. "Security!" Senator Kerr screamed, diving behind a console. Saren didn't have a gun. She had a stun baton she had lifted from a guard in the hallway. She moved through the smoke like a myth. She wasn't fighting, she was flowing. She ducked under a rifle butt, swept the guard's legs, and drove the baton into his neck. "Lumi!" Saren shouted. Mama!" Mason saw the containment cell. He sprinted toward it. A guard stepped in his path. Mason didn't slow down. He used the momentum, slamming his shoulder into the guard's chest, driving him back into the machinery. He reached the console. "Lumi, close your eyes." He shot the glass. The reinforced pane shattered. Saren was there instantly, pulling the wires off her daughter. Lumi fell into her arms, weeping. "I have you," Saren promised. "I have you." "The machine," Lumi gasped, pointing at the black crystal spiral. "It is awake!" The room suddenly lurched. It wasn't an explosion, and it was gravity. The Kethran technology, reacting to Lumi's distress and the sudden surge of adrenaline in her blood, activated. The artificial gravity in the room flipped 90 degrees. Mason fell sideways, slamming into the wall that was now the floor. Scientists and politicians tumbled like rag dolls, sliding down the length of the room. "Hold on!" Mason yelled, grabbing a conduit pipe. Lumi's eyes flared, blinding white. The black crystals began to spin. A hologram projected from the center of the spiral, expanding until it filled the entire room. It was a map, but not just a map of stars. It showed pathways, bright, golden veins weaving through the dark sectors of the galaxy. Warp corridors, Mason realized, staring up at the projection. Stable routes through the Antares drift. It cuts travel time by 80%. It is not just travel. Director Sloane's voice cut through the chaos. Sloane was standing on a magnetic gantry, her boots locked to the metal. She was upside down relative to Mason, but she looked perfectly comfortable. "It is control," Sloane said. "Whoever holds these routes controls the trade of 5 sectors. They can starve a planet or feed it." Senator Kerr was clinging to a desk, his face purple. "Director Marr, secure the asset. This is Commonwealth property." Sloan looked at the senator and smiled. It was a reptile smile. "No." "Senator," Sloan said, "it is my property." She raised her pistol and fired. Senator Kerr's chest exploded. He fell into the gravity well, dead before he hit the far wall. "Treason!" a Helix security commander shouted. "Evolution," Sloan corrected. She signaled her personal unit, the white-armored High Guard. They opened fire on the Helix Dominion security team. The room erupted into a three-way war. Helix guards fighting Sloan's traitors. Mason and Saren caught in the middle. "We have to go," Saren yelled. Then, a new sound tore through the station. An exterior breach. The walls shook. "Catherine ships," Mason shouted, checking his wrist comp. "Resistance fighters, the beacon brought them." The Catherine resistance had arrived, drawn by the activation of the ancient tech. They were boarding the station. Now it was a four-way chaotic brawl. "Lumi!" Saren held her daughter's face. "Can you shut it down?" "No!" Lumi cried. "It wants a pilot. It wants the Guardian." Saren looked at the machine. She looked at the spinning crystals. "I am the Guardian," Saren said softly. Mason looked at her. "What?" "My family," Saren said, standing up, bracing herself against the gravity shift. "We were not just engineers, Mason. We were the keepers of the gate. Kale married into my line. That is why Lumi has the eyes. But I have the blood." She looked at the interface. "I can overload it," Saren said. "I can blow the reactor, but I need to be at the console." "That is in the middle of the kill zone," Mason shouted. "Then cover me," Saren said. She didn't wait for an answer. She ran. She ran across the wall-turned floor, dodging plasma fire. Mason stood up, exposed, and opened fire. He became a turret. He laid down a wall of suppression fire, taking out two of Sloan's guards who turned to target Saren. "Go!" Mason roared. "Go!" Saren reached the console. She didn't type. She placed her hands on the black stone. The machine screamed. The golden veins on the map turned red. A warning. The station AI blared. "Reactor critical. Structural collapse imminent." "She is destroying the prize," Sloan shrieked. "Kill her!" Mason saw Sloan aiming at Saren. He didn't have a shot. He was out of ammo. He did the only thing he could. He tackled the nearest terminal, the uplink station for the entire facility. "If I can't shoot you," Mason snarled, ripping the cover off the data port, "I will burn you." He jammed the data spike Imani had given him into the port. "Upload all," Mason commanded. "Broadcast wideband, every frequency, every news feed." The screens around the room flickered. Files began to scroll. The Project Burial manifests. The edited death reports of the refugees. The Helix Dominion contracts paying for the accidents. The video of Sloan executing Senator Kerr. "What are you doing?" Sloan screamed, looking at the screens. "I am turning the lights on," Mason yelled. The truth went out. It hit the orbital relays. It hit the planetary networks. In seconds, billions of people saw the face of the conspiracy. The station groaned. A support beam crashed down, separating Mason from Saren and Lumi. "Mason!" Saren screamed. A blast door slammed shut between them, triggered by the lockdown. Mason was on the wrong side. He was trapped in the server alcove. The air was already venting. Through the thick glass of the door, he saw Saren pounding on the metal. Lumi was crying. "Go!" Mason shouted, though they couldn't hear him. He pressed his hand against the glass. "Get to the ship!" Saren shook her head. She was screaming his name. She refused to leave. Mason looked at the collapsing room. Sloan was retreating, her coup in tatters. The station was falling apart. He was going to die here. And strangely, he was okay with it. He had balanced the ledger, but Saren wasn't okay with it. She grabbed Lumi. She pointed at the door, or she pointed at Mason. "Open it," Saren commanded. Lumi looked at the door. She looked at the Kethrin machine behind them. The child closed her eyes. She screamed, a sound of pure psychic effort. The Kethrin machine pulsed. A beam of white energy shot from the crystal, bypassing the station's systems entirely. It hit the blast door. The metal didn't melt. It dissolved. It turned into mist. The ancient tech overrode the human physics. Mason stumbled forward, coughing in the sudden rush of air. Saren grabbed him. She dragged him toward the hangar bay. "You do not get to be a martyr," she yelled at him, tears streaming down her dusty face. "You promised me after." They ran. They dodged falling debris. They sprinted past fighting Kethrin and Commonwealth soldiers who were too busy trying to survive the collapse to stop them. They reached the smuggler's corvette just as the ceiling of the hangar bay gave way. Mason fired the engines before the ramp was fully closed. The ship shot out of the crater, riding the shockwave of the collapsing station. Behind them, the black site imploded, burying the secrets and the bodies under millions of tons of lunar rock. But the beacon was still active. On the dashboard of the ship, the galaxy map was still glowing. "We are clear," Mason gasped, wrestling the controls. Saren slumped in the co-pilot seat, holding Lumi. "We are alive," Saren whispered. She looked out the viewport. Across the sector, ships were dropping out of warp. Commonwealth fleets, Kethrin warships, independent scavenger vessels. They were all converging on the coordinates. "They saw the map," Mason said, looking at the sensors. When Lumi opened the door, she lit up the whole sky. Saren looked down at her daughter, who was sleeping now, exhausted. "They know," Saren said. "Everyone knows who she is now." "We bought the truth," Mason said grimly, "but the price was anonymity." He reached over and took Saren's hand. "They will come for her," he said. Saren squeezed his hand. Her grip was iron. "Let them come," she said. "We are not hiding anymore." Mason looked at the woman and the child. He felt the phantom weight of the gun in his hand and the very real warmth of Saren's skin. "No," Mason said. "We are not hiding." He punched the coordinates for deep space, not running away, just moving to higher ground. The galaxy was burning, but for the first time in his life, Mason Vale knew exactly what he was fighting for. The upload hit the Commonwealth datasphere like a kinetic strike. Mason Vale had pressed the button on the moon, and the truth had traveled at light speed, shattering the carefully curated reality of 20 billion citizens. The files were everywhere. The unredacted death certificates of refugees, the invoices from Helix Dominion paying for pacification squads, the video of Director Sloan Marr executing a senator in cold blood. The reaction was not peace. It was combustion. Riots erupted in the lower levels of the capital arcology. Corporate towers were firebombed. Helix Dominion stock plummeted so fast the trading algorithms triggered a market-wide freeze. And the propaganda machine, desperate to regain control, spun its gears into a shriek of denial. On every state-sanctioned feed, Saren's face was plastered in high-definition red. The alien witch, the terrorist mother, the creature who seduced a decorated agent and brainwashed him into treason. But out in the drift, among the rusted hulls of the refugee flotillas where Mason and Saren were hiding, the signal was different. The Shadowlark, the battered corvette they had stolen, was docked inside the cavernous belly of a massive heavy hauler ship. It was a floating city of the displaced, a hive of welded metal and desperate hope. Mason sat on a crate of protein rations watching Saren. She was disguised. She had cut her hair short, severing the elegant Catherine braid, and rubbed engine grease into the high planes of her cheekbones. She wore a mechanic's jumpsuit that was 3 sizes too big. She looked tired, but she did not look afraid. "Stop staring," Saren said, not looking up from the datapad she was decoding. "You look like a nervous dog waiting for a kick." "I am checking the perimeter," Mason said. "We are safe here, for now." "We are never safe," Saren corrected. "We are just temporarily invisible." They were surrounded by her people, Kethran refugees, humans who had been cast out of the core worlds, smugglers with hearts of gold and criminal records to match. They moved around Mason and Saren with a quiet reverence. They had seen the files. They knew that the woman in the grease-stained jumpsuit was the one who had cracked the sky open. "We need to eat," Saren said, standing up. "Lumi is asleep. I bribed the hauler captain to watch her." They walked out onto the promenade of the refugee ship. It was a chaotic bazaar of scents and sounds. A stall nearby was frying something that smelled violently savory. Saren stopped. She pointed at a stick of meat dripping with synthetic sauce. "What is that?" she asked the vendor, a grizzled human with a cybernetic eye. "Rat gator, probably," the vendor grunted. "Or recycled boot leather. 5 credits. Mason grimaced. "Saren, don't. That will kill you faster than Sloane's hit squad." Saren bought 2. She took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and swallowed. Her eyes widened. "It is disgusting," she announced. She took another bite. "It is greasy, salty, and entirely chemically unstable." She wiped sauce from her chin. "It is deliciously unethical." Mason stared at her. Then, a laugh bubbled up in his chest. It wasn't the jagged, hysterical laughter of the escape. It was real. It was warm. He laughed until his ribs ached. He laughed at the absurdity of it, the galaxy burning down around them, and Saren Vala critiquing street food like a food critic in hell. Saren watched him, a small smile touching her lips. "There he is." "Who?" Mason asked, wiping his eyes. "The man who isn't a ghost," she said. Mason stopped laughing. He looked at her, standing there in the neon gloom of a refugee ship, eating garbage meat with the grace of a queen. He realized something profound. For 2 years, laughter had felt like a betrayal of the dead. Now, it just felt like survival. "I am here," Mason said. "Good," Saren said, "because the vacation is over." She pointed to a large public screen above the promenade. The text scrolling across the bottom was urgent. Emergency tribunal convened. Senator Kerr called to testify. Immunity deals on the table. "Kerr is alive," Mason frowned. "Sloane shot him. Sloane shot a clone or a body double, or perhaps the gravity shift saved him." Saren said, "It does not matter. He is trying to spin the narrative. He is going to blame everything on a rogue faction. He is going to blame Sloane, and he is going to blame us." "Sloane has gone underground," Mason noted, reading the feed. "The Intelligence Bureau cannot find her. She is waiting," Saren said. "She is a hunter." Saren threw the rest of the meat stick into a recycler. She wiped her hands on her jumpsuit. "We are going back," she stated. Mason froze. "To the capital?" "Saren, that is suicide. There are kill orders on both our heads." "They cannot kill us if the whole galaxy is watching," Saren said. "Kerr wants a tribunal? Fine. We will give him a witness he cannot redact." "You want to testify," Mason realized. "I refuse to be a victim on a screen." "Mason," Saren said. Her voice was steel. "I refuse to be the weeping widow or the alien terrorist. I am going to walk into their Senate, and I am going to look them in the eye. I am going to turn their stage into my weapon. They will have assassins, Mason warned. Sloan won't let you speak. Then you will have to catch the bullets, Saren said. She reached out and straightened his collar, a domestic gesture in the middle of a war zone. That is your job, isn't it? Protection. Yes, Mason said. He covered her hand with his. That is my job. The arrival was not subtle. The Commonwealth Senate chamber was a masterpiece of intimidation, a floating coliseum of glass and gold, orbiting high above the capital planet. It was designed to make anyone standing on the floor feel small. Today, it was packed. Senators, lobbyists, military commanders. The air was thick with tension and the smell of fierce sweat. Senator Kerr stood at the podium. He looked pale, his arm in a sling, a calculated injury to garner sympathy. These fabrications, Kerr was shouting, waving a datapad, are the work of Kethran extremists. The video of Director Marr is a deep fake. The so-called Project Burial is a myth. The sensors on the perimeter wall began to scream. Proximity alert, the sergeant-at-arms yelled. Unidentified vessels entering the defense zone. Shoot them down, Kerr commanded. We can't, the defense controller replied, his voice trembling. Sir, there are too many of them. Through the massive transparasteel dome of the Senate, the sky darkened. They came out of the warp shadows, not warships, not cruisers, tugs, haulers, rusty freighters, mining skiffs, thousands of them. A wall of metal and engines, the refugee fleet. They formed a protective ring around a single small corvette. They are hailing us, the controller said. It is the Shadow Lark. Let them land, the High Chancellor ordered from her elevated throne. She looked at Kerr with disdain. If this is a myth, Senator, let us see the storyteller. The corvette docked. The airlock to the Senate chamber hissed open. Security guards raised their rifles. Stand down, the High Chancellor barked. Let them enter. Saren Vala walked in. She had shed the mechanic's jumpsuit. She wore a ceremonial robe woven from the thermal blankets of the refugee ships, shimmering silver and patchwork gray. It was the clothing of the displaced, worn like royal raiment. Mason walked a step behind her, wearing his old dress uniform, stripped of rank insignia, his face grim, and between them, holding Saren's hand, was Lumi. The child was small. She wore a simple white tunic. She walked into the room that had ordered her death, and she did not look at the floor. She looked up. She looked at the thousands of humans in the gallery. She looked at the senators who had voted to fear her. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Saren stopped at the center of the floor. She did not bow. You called for the truth, Saren said. Her voice was amplified by the room's acoustics, clear and bell-like. Here she is, Senator Kerr spluttered. This is a farce. That creature is a weapon, a biological threat. She is a child, Saren said. Her name is Lumi, and she has a message for you. Lumi stepped forward. She let go of her mother's hand. She looked at the central dais. Her eyes, those deep pools of violet and starfire, began to glow. The lights in the Senate chamber dimmed. The air grew cold. Do not fear, Lumi said. Her voice was not loud, but it resonated in the teeth of every person in the room. The phenomenon began. The Kethran artifact, which Saren had brought in a containment case, hummed in response to Lumi's proximity. It projected a hologram. But not a map this time. It projected a memory. The air above the Senate floor filled with light. A scene formed. It was the interior of a processing cell. Kyle, Saren's husband, was on his knees. A Helix executive was standing over him with a neural whip. Give us the codes, the executive screamed, or we burn the sector. The codes are not for war, Kyle gasped, spitting blood. The gate is for everyone. It is for trade, for connection. If you use it for war, you break the bridge. Then die, the executive sneered. I die protecting the bridge, Kale whispered. The memory faded. The silence returned. But it had changed. It was no longer hostile. It was ashamed. Lumi's eyes dimmed. She looked at the High Chancellor. My father did not hate you, Lumi said simply. He died to stop you from hurting yourselves. Senator Kerr looked around the room. He saw the faces of his colleagues. He saw the shift. He was losing them. This is a trick, Kerr shouted. A manipulation, and him. He pointed a shaking finger at Mason. That man is a traitor. He is a Project Burial operative. Anything he says is a lie. Mason stepped forward. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had walked through hell and decided to set up camp. I am a traitor, Mason said. His voice was rough. I betrayed the Commonwealth when I followed orders to erase a murder. I betrayed my oath when I let them put a seal in my brain to make me forget. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a data slug. I am refusing immunity, Mason announced. A gasp went through the room. I am confessing to 18 counts of conspiracy, 12 counts of illegal detention, and accessory to murder, Mason said. I did it. I was part of Project Burial, and I took my orders from him. He pointed at Kerr. And from Director Sloan Marr. Mason continued. And from the board of Helix Dominion. Here are the names. Here are the dates. Here are the bank accounts. He placed the data slug on the evidence table. I am not a hero, Mason said to the camera drones hovering near his face. I am the man who buried the bodies, and I am done digging. It wasn't a heroic speech. It was a suicide note for his freedom. And that was why it landed. The truth, stripped of self-preservation, had a weight that could not be denied. Kerr slumped against his podium. He knew it was over. But the danger wasn't Kerr. Saren's head snapped up. Her predator instincts, honed by months of running, flared. She saw the shimmer in the upper gallery, a distortion in the air, active camouflage. Mason, she screamed. It happened in slow motion. A figure materialized on the balcony. A sniper, not a generic assassin. It was a woman in a sleek, personalized combat suit. Sloan. She raised a high-velocity railgun. She wasn't aiming at Mason. She wasn't aiming at Saren. She was aiming at Lumi. Chaos, Sloan whispered. She fired. The sound was a crack of thunder. Mason didn't think. He didn't calculate. The old pattern, sacrificing others for stability, for the mission, for the greater good, was gone. He moved. He threw himself across the space between him and the child. He wrapped his body around Lumi, turning his back to the balcony. The railgun slug hit him. It struck his left shoulder, punching through the Kevlar weave of his uniform, shattering the scapula, and exiting through the clavicle. The impact threw him and Lumi to the floor. No! Saren shrieked. The Senate guards opened fire on the balcony. Sloan returned fire, moving with terrifying speed, vaulting over the railing and disappearing into the maintenance shafts. She had missed her kill shot, and she knew when to cut losses. Saren was on the floor. She pulled Lumi out from under Mason. Lumi was covered in blood, but it wasn't hers. Mason! Saren rolled him over. His face was gray, and the wound was horrific. Did I? Mason gasped, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. Did I catch it? You idiot, Saren sobbed, pressing her hands against the wound to staunch the flow. You absolute idiot. Lumi? She is safe, Saren said. You saved her. You saved her. Mason. Mason's eyes started to drift shut. The pain was receding. replaced by a cold, inviting numbness. It felt like the forgetting. It felt like peace. "Don't you dare," Saren snarled. She grabbed his face, smearing her own bloody hands across his cheeks. She leaned close, her forehead touching his. "Stay with me, Mason Vale," she commanded. "You do not get to slip away. You do not get to leave me here to explain this to them alone. You promised me after. We are not at after yet." "Tired," Mason whispered. "I don't care," Saren shouted, shaking him. "Fight it, look at me, I am ordering you to stay." She spoke him back to life. She poured her rage and her love and her terrifying will into him, anchoring him to the pain, forcing him to remain in the world of the living. Medics swarmed them. Saren didn't let go of his hand. The medbay was quiet. The hum of the healing field was a soft, rhythmic pulse. Mason lay in the bed, his shoulder encased in a regenerative gel cast. He was pale, but he was alive. Saren sat in the chair next to the bed. She had washed the blood off her hands, but she felt like it was still there, under the skin. Mason opened his eyes. "Hey!" he rasped. Saren looked at him. She didn't smile. Her eyes were red. "You took a railgun slug," she said. "It seemed like the polite thing to do." Mason tried to joke. It hurt to laugh. Saren stood up. She walked to the window, looking out at the stars. "I am terrified," she said softly. Mason watched her. "Of Sloan?" "No," Saren said. She turned to face him. "Of this. Of you." She walked back to the bed. "I loved Cale," she said. "He was my world, and they killed him. They tore him out of my life and left a hole that I thought would never fill. I swore I would never let anyone in again, because the loss destroys you." She gripped the railing of the bed. "When you went down on that floor," Saren whispered, her voice breaking, "I felt it again. The ice. The end of the world. Mason, I cannot be a widow twice. I cannot survive it." Mason reached out with his good hand. He found hers. "Saren," he said, "it is not safe." She said, "Loving you is not safe." "No," Mason said, "it isn't." He pulled her hand, urging her closer. She sat on the edge of the bed. "Love is not a guarantee of safety," Mason said. "I learned that the hard way. I tried to find safety in numbness. I tried to find it in forgetting. But that wasn't safety. That was just death while breathing." He looked into her violet eyes. "Love is a commitment to truth," Mason said. "Even when the truth is terrifying. Even when the truth is that we might lose each other. I would rather stand in front of a bullet for you and know it hurts, than live 100 years wondering if I was real." Saren stared at him. A tear slid down her cheek. "You are a fool," she whispered. "I am your fool," Mason answered. She leaned down. She kissed him. It wasn't desperate like the kiss in the supply closet. It was tender. It was aching. It was a boundary being crossed, not with force, but with absolute terrifying honesty. She was careful of his wound, but she wasn't careful with her heart. She laid her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of the life she had demanded he keep. "We are broken people," Saren murmured against his skin. "We are mending," Mason said, stroking her short hair. "We don't erase the grief. Saren, we just build around it." The political fallout was messy. It was grinding. It was real. Senator Kerr was arrested, stripped of rank, and faced a public trial that would drag on for years. Helix Dominion was dismantled, its assets frozen, its executives indicted. The stock market crashed, then corrected, then stabilized. Public trust in the Commonwealth was fractured. The citizens looked at their government and saw the cracks. But through those cracks, light was getting in. Reforms began. They were slow and they were fought over, but they began. And they were led, in part, by the refugees who were finally given a seat at the table. Sloan Marr was never found. A week after the shooting, a message was delivered to Saren's datapad. It was encrypted, but the signature was unmistakable. "This galaxy eats soft hearts, my dear. Enjoy your victory. I will be watching from the dark." Saren read it, then deleted it. "She is gone?" Mason asked, watching her. "She is vanishing," Saren said. "But the danger isn't gone. It is simply named." "We can handle named danger," Mason said. The closing sequence was quiet. There were no parades, no medals. Mason, Saren, and Lumi stood at the airlock of a modest long-range cruiser. It wasn't the stolen Corvette. It was a diplomatic vessel, gifted by the new provisional government. They were not fugitives. They were free people. Mason wore civilian clothes, a simple jacket, durable trousers. He looked younger. The weight of the secrets was gone from his shoulders. Lumi ran up the ramp, clutching a small doll that someone had given her. She turned back and waved. "Are you ready?" Saren asked. She stood beside Mason. She looked regal, even in simple clothes. "Where are we going?" Mason asked, though he knew. "Kethra," Saren said. "My home. We have an ancient technology to return to its guardians, and I have a husband to bury properly." Mason nodded. "And after that?" "After that," Saren said, looking at the stars, "we see what is out there. The gate is open. Mason, we can go anywhere." She looked at him. The love in her eyes was clear, unshadowed by the past. "No more burying?" Saren said. Mason looked at the woman who had saved him by forcing him to save himself. He looked at the child waiting on the ramp, the girl with the universe in her eyes. "No more running," Mason answered. He took her hand. They walked up the ramp together. The airlock cycled shut. The engines flared, a bright blue star against the dark. The ship turned toward the Antares drift, toward the uncertain future, the chosen family, and the earned hope. The stars swallowed them, not as an ending, but as a beginning.